Welcome to Feminist Utopia, a community dedicated to envisioning and creating a more just society for all. Welcome to Feminist Utopia, and happy 4th of July. It's probably not the 4th, but I think it's close enough. Debby and I thought that focusing on patriotism during July would be an interesting way to talk about our feminist utopia and how patriotism falls into that. We're imagining a world where equality is the norm and acceptance is the norm, and people come together as patriotic members of society.
I could be a patriot for Feminist Utopia. We need a flag.
Oh, that's an interesting idea. We will definitely need a flag. But especially around the 4th of July, we see a lot of flags, and we thought it'd be interesting to examine the flag today and the history. So thank you for joining us, and here we go.
It was interesting when we started talking about flags. We just thought of the American flag and then all these other flags that are currently important. It was a very interesting episode to research, especially with Betsy Ross. For our non-U.S. listeners, Betsy Ross is a cherished myth. Sorry, I'm not supposed to say that. The Americans might get offended when I say this. Betsy Ross making the first American flag is a myth. Let's just start with that.
Yeah.
What's interesting is Elizabeth Ross was a businesswoman in Philadelphia, and she probably only made flags for military staff members or naval flags. But 90 years after the Revolutionary War, her grandson in Victorian times started perpetuating the story of his grandmother as this woman who did this flag, and she was the epitome of Victorian womanhood, when really Betsy Ross was a businesswoman who supported the Revolutionary War and lost 2 husbands to it. The Betsy Ross would stand there and gently suggest to General Washington that putting an extra point on the star, making it a 5-point star, was what he should do. And he was like, yes, you are such a woman of virtue. We love your ideas, and now you can sew us the flag. Now, Betsy Ross's house is a major tourist attraction in Philadelphia.
Right. And it's a cherished story, just like George Washington chopping down the cherry tree and saying, I cannot tell a lie. But like that story, there's little truth to it. There's no record of the Betsy Ross incident discussed in any official or anecdotal documents of the time. But a couple of reasons I think that the myth survives is in the 19th century, ordinary women made history.
Yes.
And by that, I mean that they literally recorded the history. They told the stories, attached the importance to family relics. They joined honorary societies and carried flags at public events. So it was the women that were telling the stories. And they created a version of America and American history that broke down the boundaries between the male world of war and politics and the supposedly domestic worlds of women. And they did so not by challenging women's exclusion from politics, because of course they couldn't vote or participate at that time, but they did it by elevating their devotion to the state and creating this Betsy Ross myth of a heroine that was so devoted to her country and hand sewed this flag for the glory of the state. And that's one of the reasons why the myth survives, I think.
The myth is so strong. I remember during the bicentennial. I'm old enough to remember the bicentennial.
Oh, I totally remember the bicentennial.
But my class, we all dressed up as little Betsy Rosses with these little colonial caps. And we had to sit there and we sang this song about sewing things. And we had sewing hoops, and it was the first time I'd ever held a needle. And my mom was mad that we were singing a song about a woman who sewed a flag. I didn't get it. I just liked the hat. I was 6. But this idea that that was how women could contribute by creating the symbols that the men could fight for. It's a European concept. It goes back to the Middle Ages, where women would grant their knights their favors, their little handkerchiefs. And so the knights could fight for them in duels or tournaments. So it was an outgrowth of that. I still have my Betsy Ross hat.
I was 11. During the bicentennial, my family took a road trip and I went to Betsy Ross's house in Philadelphia and we saw the Liberty Bell and we drove all the way down to Florida and we went to Disney World. But they had bicentennial parades every night and fireworks and like Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse walk around. They had Betsy Ross and George Washington walk around, and I do remember that fondly.
But it's interesting how they make Betsy Ross like the founding mother when you look at the fact that Martha Washington pretty much funded George's little forays into the Continental Army, the women that were thinkers, the women that promoted Enlightenment ideals. But we idolize someone who made flags, and probably not even the flag we idolize her for making. So I find it very interesting. It comes back to the concept of the importance of flags. Americans get irrationally angry, I feel, about burning a flag or doing this, or, if you're not worshiping the flag, then somehow you're desecrating them personally.
Nationalism in the form of a flag isn't really unique to America. But what is unique, I think, is this reverence for it and the way it's embodied in the flag. So Mark Leibson, the author of Flag, An American Biography, observed that the near religious adoration that many Americans have of their flags is unlike anything in the rest of the world. Some historians go so far as to call it the cult of the flag and believe it emerged in the wake of the Civil War and exploded in the late 1800s. And then you have the more recent history. There was a split over the flag that happened during the Vietnam War. Conservatives saw the flag as a symbol of freedom and military might, and those on the left who opposed the war decided that they no longer pledge allegiance to it. It's during those times of conflict that the flag increasingly became a symbol of a kind of a patriotism, a more militaristic patriotism, a kind of a racial patriotism, and a celebration of a white America.
That makes a lot of sense. There's some research that's come out. It's called terror management theory. It says that we invest heavily in symbolic cultural institutions and identifications because they insulate us from the fears about our own mortal predicament. We're going to die. What kind of legacy are we going to leave? And if you see things coming apart at the seams, like during the Vietnam War, or if you really do believe part of your legacy is white supremacy and the civil rights movement happens, these things become such an issue to your own personal identity and safety. Basic idea is that from a scientific perspective, each of us is an organism that wants to continue to survive, but we're no more significant or enduring than any other thing on this earth. But unlike our cats or our dogs, we know that we're immortal. My cat doesn't worry about it. He worries about how I'm not treating him right. Terror management theory says we cope with this knowledge by viewing ourselves as part of something bigger, be it the Catholic Church or the American Marine Corps. I mean, I know the U.S. Marine Corps was my dad's primary identification. And so it lets us feel we're special. If you stop treating those sacred things as special, then they're going to go into oblivion and die.
Right. I mean, if you look at what happened after 9/11 and the proliferation of flags that were everywhere, it was a moment of kind of national unity and pride again in the flag, but not for everyone. Some cab drivers, especially Sikhs, displayed flags from their cars so they wouldn't be attacked. So these flags and other political symbols really get their meanings from their impact.
Yes.
When flags are flown at certain events, the flags become symbols of that. the Confederate flag flown at the white supremacist rally.
Or the Nazi flag.
Yep.
The swastika flag. There's another one. Find people on both sides.
Flags are flown at rallies alongside other symbols of hate and messages of white supremacy. The flags become synonymous with that ideology. And even after the rally is over, the symbolic meanings don't get left behind. They're become part of that intimidation and hate that they're intended to convey.
And they want it that way. It unites their members and makes them feel like they're part of something bigger. And I think the Confederate flag is a perfect example of that in terms of American context. The Nazi flag has a more international flair. But for white supremacists that are really tied up in white identity being an American thing, they tend to default to the Confederate flag. The Confederate flag wasn't even the flag of the Confederacy. This is what I was stunned by. It was the battle flag of Robert E. Lee, and it didn't come into prominence until that time period that you discussed earlier, Benita, where women were making the history and telling the stories and joining these societies like the Daughters of the American Revolution. In the 1890s, the Daughters of the Confederate Army came about, and that was also the time when the resurgence of the KKK came, and the Confederate flag became the symbol of the lost cause about those poor white supremacist Southerners who were just defending states' rights, and we need to put up monuments to them. And also we need to let Black people know that Jim Crow is now the law and Reconstructionist times are over. It was purposefully a symbol of white supremacy. And women, white women in the South, took part in it because they wanted to. They wanted this identity. And they used the Confederate flag to do that. And so now when you see someone in Eastern Washington, I saw this on the highway, people flying Confederate flags. I'm like, first of all, you can't say that's your culture. You see it in Michigan. Really? Yeah. Really? That's your culture? You know that Michigan had some of the best battle groups in the Civil War. But they tremendously instilled the idea that even though they lost the Civil War, they still got to maintain their white supremacy. And anybody who tells you the Confederate flag is not about white supremacy doesn't know anything other than they want to be part of that too. They can say all they want, but if that's your culture, then own it.
I mean, we do live in a time when these white nationalist rallies have been on their rise. And when you put the Confederate flag and these other flags together with the American flag, it's almost like saying that the values of inclusion, peace, and justice aren't American values. Ours values of white supremacy are the values.
Yes. And it's still going on now. The United Daughters of the Confederacy still exists. They put up a lot of these Confederate statues that we need to take down. And they do this because I think they believe they gain status in this form of Southern womanhood. They're taking scraps from the patriarchal table and have perpetuated violence against people of color and nonconforming white women ever since its founding, all the way up through 2019. The female governor of Alabama, Kay Ivey, doubled down with her support of Roy Moore, that Senate candidate who liked to creep on young girls. And she also says we need to bring the Confederate flag back to Alabama and all these other things. 2019.
It's just insidious. And we know also from the social justice movements that the impact is greater than the intent.
Yes.
People want to say that the Confederate flag is heritage, not hate. But when it has been used as an intimidation tool by extremists, you can't all of a sudden now say, oh, we didn't mean it that way and this is what it really means. No, we're still sitting in a time where the American flag invokes feelings of terror for an increasing number of people, and it's the most vulnerable among us that experiences that terror the worst. And you don't have to look any further than the concentration camps that are in existence along our border. These immigration centers are full of flags and pictures of Donald Trump and the American flag and a new generation of young children and these vulnerable immigrants are learning to associate the flag with terror and hate and lack of human rights and dignities.
Well, maybe they can get together and discuss with the Vietnamese people too. Like, how do you cope with that? How do you deal with that when the flag's everywhere? But we have a long history of this flag causing fear in people, and I'd like to be part of the group that changes that moving forward. And step one is to get kids out of concentration camps, and I'm Jewish, and yes, they are concentration camps. Don't come at me with your weak tea about saying it's co-opting something from the Holocaust, because it is. The use of flags, especially in authoritarian cultures, is a well-known phenomenon. Jonathan Haidt talks about it in his books. And so it's not surprising that there have been additional flags created. The Confederate flag was created in the 1890s to scare the hell out of people and make sure Black people knew their place. And then in more recent times, we have the Blue Lives Matter flag.
Yeah, and I was surprised to learn that that was just a thing since 2014, and it was created by a 19-year-old University of Michigan student named Andrew Jacob. And he's got meanings for everything. The black above represents citizens, and the black below represents criminals in his description. Despite the fact that those on the wrong side of the line are typically citizens themselves, that's just an afterthought. And his business, the Thin Blue Line, has sold some like 50,000 flags, t-shirts, hats, hoodies. And then that whole Blue Lives Matter movement, it began in December of 2014 after the slaying of New York City police officers and as a rebuttal to Black Lives Matter. And the idea was that Blue Lives Matter is supposed to be the insistence that we pay more attention to cops killed in the line of duty. It's just a real racist symbol. I can't even articulate how frustrated I am with this flag and what it represents. That Thin Blue Line flag is associated with messages about fighting the Islamic State, illegals, socialism. They also recall media reports on police violence and say that the media itself is seen as an enemy of law and order. And it's almost as if the blue line on the flag is that question of, which side are you on? Are you going to fly this flag and be on the side of law enforcement, or are you going to deny the flag and be on the side of chaos and murder?
And those bad Black people. This is so like the Confederate flag based in racism, whether they believe it or not. And I find that just disgusting. And this has always bothered me about the Blue Lives Matter movement. First of all, you're not born blue. You choose to be blue. And the idea that being a cop is a super dangerous thing. There are other occupations that have higher injury and death rates. And if you're not unconditionally supporting the police, then you're a hateful, awful person, and you just want to support criminals. It's the othering. There are flags that aren't about othering, and we'll end on a positive note about that flag.
Yeah.
But it's really difficult to find a common ground when the flag itself is designed to say, you're okay and you're not.
Right. And what's really dangerous about this is these authoritarian movements subvert the rule of law in the name of order.
Yes.
And then eventually the new order becomes law. So it's gone so far where policymakers across the United States are introducing bills proposing that police be included under hate crime protections. As if there wasn't already enough protections for the police, they want to say that hurting them is a hate crime. Communities that have attempted to regulate the Thin Blue Line flag, a law proposed in Ohio would afford it a favored status, not extended to the flag of Black Lives Matter, which features nothing but the movement's name. So the Thin Blue Line flag is basically the United States flag in black and white with the thin blue line, and that's somehow not offensive to the American flag, but the flag of the Black Lives Matter movement, which has no symbolism stolen from the United States flag, is somehow more offensive?
Well, it's encoding this idea, again, that if you're not with us, you're against us. But I find it really telling that they're enshrining this flag that's copyrighted and is a moneymaker for some jackass from Michigan. So the idea you can't say no Blue Lives Matter flag at our event. Well, how can you say that? It's a protected flag. It's just like the American flag. And personally, I'm increasingly of the feeling that flags just suck all around. But after doing the research for this episode, what good comes of these things? But we end on a positive note, I promise. Today was a rough day, bad decisions coming down from the Supreme Court and stuff. And
oh my God. It has been a bad day, but we've talked about ending on a positive note. Let's move towards the pride flag, because I believe that is a positive note. It's a symbol
of inclusion.
Yeah. And the colors are supposed to reflect the diversity of the community. And it's a symbol of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, asexual. That plus includes things I don't even know right now, but it's all in there. It was originally devised by an artist named Gilbert Baker in San Francisco, and it's now used worldwide. So the flag was typically flown at embassies during the month of June, not instead of the American flag, but in conjunction with. It was a practice routinely approved for most of the decade at many embassies, but now this year, under the Trump administration, they denied permission to fly the pride flag. So Mike Pompeo became Secretary of State. He's an evangelical Christian who believes marriage is defined as between a man and a woman. And for the first year, he denied all these requests to fly the flag. And unfortunately, some gay employees in the Foreign and Civil Service say that the ban on the rainbow flag is just the tip of an iceberg. Pompeo still hasn't, as of this recording, issued a statement for Pride Month. It's the end of June. He did last year, but he didn't attend the State Department's annual Pride Day for 2 years running. His predecessors usually did. And a transgender woman, Robin McCutcheon, who has served in several posts abroad for the U.S., is saying it's death by 1,000 cuts. Our rights as LGBT plus Americans are being eroded with the removal of a guidance here, the rewriting of policy there, or just the quiet disappearance of a website.
If you take away the image, how can you promote the concept? If you take away the flag, what will people rally around? Evangelicals are mad about the pride flag. And evidently, the people who created the straight pride flag thought the LGBTQ community took all the colors because their flag is black and white. That's pretty much, there were no other colors they felt safe putting up. But I'm happy to see more pride flags in stores, or Pike Place Market put them up last week, all up and down on tops of the buildings. And the symbol itself is spreading even as our government diminishes it within official channels. And I know some people are talking about rainbow capitalism and stuff like that. But if Target thinks they can make a buck selling pride materials,
have at it.
Have at it.
What is the harm? And I will say that several embassies just basically flouted the law and flew the flags anyway, or they put other symbols up in other places, maybe not a flag on the flagpole, but a banner hung across the front of the building, or they found a way to recognize pride and fly the flag as an ally. And there are a number of states that are doing things to pass protections for LGBTQ plus people at the state level, where our federal level is failing. The states are stepping in. And here in Houston, they just passed a protective act for city workers. So that's a positive thing.
It's great that people are flying the flag around. It's very prevalent here in Seattle. Well, because Pride's this weekend here. Nordstrom even has a whole set of makeup classes you could go to celebrate Pride. Mac Counter, they have a class for people that are trans who want to learn how to use makeup. It's not just transitioning to women, but how do you use makeup in a non-binary way? It's such a different world to me after being in Texas.
Yeah. But Houston had our Pride Parade last weekend, and it was huge. And actually, this was the first year in about 5 years that I didn't march in the parade. I missed it, and I'll probably go back next year.
Okay, good. Which kind of takes us into our action items. You didn't think y'all were getting off easy, did you? We always have something for you to do.
Right. And I saw this on my Facebook feed. Maybe you saw it on yours as well. It actually was from Texas, a couple from Round Rock, Texas. They got a note from a neighbor, and they were touched by the note and posted it on Facebook. And it was from one of their younger neighbors that was moving away, but took the time to thank them for flying the pride flag. And the note said that seeing a pride flag so proudly outside your house every day has given me the courage to come out to my family and be more comfortable with who I am. So flying the pride flag inspires others not only to feel comfortable, but also push to expand protections for the LGBTQ community. And I hope that you'll take this opportunity to fly a pride flag, not just during Pride Month, but all year round. Because whatever small things we can do to be visible really can make a difference. And you might not know that difference, but it does make a difference to somebody.
And making a difference to one is making a huge difference. I don't want people to underestimate the power of one in situations like that. It's been a difficult history for LGBTQ people in America, and it's not likely getting a whole lot better in the next 2 years. Knowing that they have community and knowing that they're seen and recognized for who they are is going to become increasingly important.
Exactly. So, fly that pride flag.
Get that pride sticker, put it on your computer.
Honestly, I don't have one, and I'm going to go get one. I think I'm going to get one for my car. I'll put it on my car.
I changed out my old pride sticker on my computer. I still have my hero one from Houston, and I have to explain it to people.
Yeah, the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance.
Yes.
We did not get it passed in its entirety, but honestly, the city did pass some protections recently, so we're moving in that direction.
And if the federal government won't do it, we can do it at the local and state levels.
Exactly.
And that's a cheery note to end on.
Thanks for listening. Have a good week.
Bye. Thank you so much for joining us today at Feminist Utopia. If you like our work, please give us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you access our podcasts so others can find it as well. You may also become a Feminist Utopia patron at patreon.com to show your appreciation. Remember, patrons get perks.
And check out our blog and other resources at our website, feministutopia.net. Email us your idea of what a feminist utopia would look like or any questions to info@feministutopia.net. We appreciate you taking the time to listen and grow with us. Feminist Utopia is created by Debbie Williams and Benita Malone.